Hello, how are you guys? Hope everything is going okay. So today's location for the lecture is my upstairs office, which you can tell is probably a little bit of a mess. But it was worse a couple weeks ago because, quarantine. So I thought to myself, hey, clean out that room where everyone who you know has ever been in your house has dropped some stuff off. So I'll show you something interesting that I found that might have something to do with one of you. Let me see. Let's see. Oh my gosh, before I put it up there. There's a famous person, famous soccer player's signature on here. I know it's a little backwards, but maybe you can see it. Oh, maybe it's not backwards to you. It's probably just backwards to me. So when this guy is famous, star of Leander High School soccer, maybe when he's star of MLS or the World Cup or whatever, then this will be worth some money. All right. All right. You know what to do. Okay. But for tonight, we will talk about the Affluent Society. That's a John Kenneth Galbraith book. I know you're going, of course it is. We love John Kenneth Galbraith. He's one of our famous, or excuse me, our favorite social commentators slash historians. But he wrote a book about the 50s and about how we had a whole bunch of money and maybe it was time to solve some problems because we had the money to do it, but that's not exactly what we do in the United States when we have money. So the 50s is kind of like the 20s where everybody goes woohoo and they go shopping. So there's a whole lot of shopping in the 50s plus a civil rights movement. So it's kind of an odd time. And you'll notice a couple of presidents, namely Truman and Eisenhower, and they will do some really good things and then some not as good things, or mostly good. Yeah, I don't know. People don't usually complain about Truman and Eisenhower that much. So we'll talk about them. But I know you already know because the questions are posted. There are four important questions that you've got to answer. And then there's the one discussion board question. Now, if you can answer those things in the document that's presented online, it'll be easier for me to read. Most of you have been doing fine on this. Also, some of you have been asking questions. Can I get this sort of help? What if I don't have good access to the internet? You know, I am just the history teacher. So can help you with much stuff like that. I could give you like a good chocolate chip cookie recipe. I can show you like old signatures from soccer players. But yeah, technology, I can't help you with that or that sort of stuff. You know who can help you? Your transition coordinators or the student assistance service or the ACC help desk for technology. And maybe Leander ISD has one of those too. Some people are downloading the app, the APP for Blackboard, and they've said that that's been helpful for watching videos. It's easier to watch the videos in there. I put one the other day from my phone. Oh my gosh, I'm good with technology. And I don't know if you could see that or not, but okay. All right, let's talk about the 50s and the culture and the presidencies a little bit. It's a little different than the foreign policy section that you worked on a little bit, although you do have a foreign policy question here. So, all right. Also, oh yeah, yeah. If you want to watch a movie, because you got free time now, maybe you have that Netflix thing. You've probably heard about it. There's an older movie. It's not an old movie, but it's about as old as you, called Pleasantville, and it really does a good job of showing what 50s culture is like. So maybe you could watch Pleasantville and see what you think about that. Okay, and if you're wondering, am I looking? I'm looking down. I'm looking at the questions so that I make sure that I go over those things. Okay. All right. And I put this in the questions, but my expectation is that you will use the textbook to answer these questions. Now, I know you're not fans of the textbook because you have to read it, and I'm so sorry about that. Somebody asked, like, can't we get the version of the textbook that reads to us? I don't know. I mean, I don't know stuff like that. Now, I did give you a link to the textbook. You might be able to copy the text and put it into a text reader, but it'll sound like some weird computer reading. I don't know. Just read it. Get your mom to read it to you. I had a student one time whose mom read it to him. I thought that was impressive. If I'd asked my mom to do that, she would have shared some words that I don't say. So I don't know. All right, anyway. Oh, there's a candle behind my head. Do you see it? It's right there. That's from where my husband went to junior high, because that's where I student taught. All right, now we will get past my ADHD and we will start talking. It's really ADHD. I don't have much hyperactivity. But we will start talking about the 1950s stuff. Okay, thing number one, suburbanization. I know I put some videos in there. You're going to go like, oh, this is terrible. If you watch that Levittown video, some newsreels, it just shows like, hey, here's a suburb and here's how we made houses. It's probably very much like where you might live. I live in a suburb, fancy suburb in Leander. Um, and a lot of our houses look kind of the same too. If you live in a suburb, that's kind of the way that works. So this was the early era of suburbanization. Normally, people just lived in apartments or maybe houses on the edge of the city. Now that everybody's got a car, you can live pretty far away because you can drive and roads are better and gas is cheap. Sort of like now, only you have to stay home, don't you? Excuse me. Allergies. Um, but the suburban houses were kind of prefab. They pre-made some of the stuff, so it made them cheaper. There were 3 or 4 different designs, and your goal during this time period was to live in a suburb because it was trendy. It was like the whole country was a giant middle school, and that giant middle school kind of asserted that we all needed to behave the same way, kind of like an actual middle school, where if you don't exactly fit in, people give you a hard time. Hopefully, you were not the person that gave a hard time, and sorry if you were the person that received a hard time. I was probably more that person, but someday maybe you can grow up and be a history professor as well. So everything will be okay. Um, Women, suburbanization, this is a tricky time because everybody's supposed to have a fancy house out in the suburbs that looks just like everybody else's house with the picket fence, and it kind of goes along the landscape of your land, and you have some trees, and you have a couple of kids, and you'll have a 2-car garage, and everything will be cool, and you'll always look good, which is pretty weird, but you'll also be able to cook well, and there's some other things that they expected of you too that we're not going to talk about because most of you are 16 or 17, but you were supposed to be really good at everything. We'll just stop with that. Now, you were also supposed to buy a bunch of stuff because it's a nice consumer decade. I think one of the books that I don't know, maybe I took it off the list, was called Life in the Doldrums. And I read that for one of those history classes where you read about prostitution and STDs and things in population. And this one talked about the role of women. It's a really interesting book, but I remember one high school boy read it one time for the book review, and he was distressed. And I apologized to him because he didn't realize all this stuff that would be in there. But anyway, okay. He survived, though. He's in college. He should have graduated by now, so he's probably fine. But, okay, Life in the Doldrums, if you want to read a really weird book. But what was weird about the time period is you were supposed to be the perfect housewife, but you were supposed to have so much stuff that honestly, it was more stuff than you could afford to live on with just your husband's income. And you probably had to work. So that was kind of a weird expectation of the time period that you would have enough money to spend all this stuff, to have all the cool things in your house that everybody was supposed to have at the time period. But your main priority was always supposed to be your husband and your family. And if your marriage was a mess, then you were a failure. There was also this book called Dr. Spock's Baby and Child Care. Oh my goodness. Everybody got that book. I'm afraid my mother got that book. And mostly what it taught you was, if your kids are not perfect, you're a terrible mother. Wow. That was no fun for my mom, I'm pretty sure, and I guarantee you it wasn't the greatest for us either because we always got the don't embarrass the family. What you do is a reflection on me as a mother, that sort of thing. You may still get that lecture because maybe you have an old school mom like I had as well. So it was tough for them though because their identity was really wrapped up in whether they had a good marriage and whether their kids did the right thing. So that was kind of tricky. You're supposed to have a whole bunch of stuff. You're supposed to be perfect. Your kids are supposed to be perfect. Your life's supposed to be perfect. Everybody's life was perfect. If it wasn't, you lied about it so that everybody would think your life was perfect. Now, on pages 944 to 954, there's more specific stuff that will help you. If you just write, everybody's life is supposed to be perfect, and if it wasn't, you lied about it, then I'm going to know you were lazy. You didn't look the stuff up. Don't be lazy, because then you're like a bad, bad housewife in the 1950s. All right, I'm not trying to shame you, but look those pages up and you'll get some specific examples. You may have noticed that if you're not getting the full points, it's because you're really being a little more general than I would like. So give a specific example or two for each question. And the page numbers that I put on the assignment this week hopefully will help you find some stuff there. Okay. Also, there's this weird thing in the book called an index. I know it's at the back, and you can look stuff up and it tells you what page to go to. I know I'm not trying to be a jerk, but you guys don't use textbooks as much. So, index, it's good. Some books have those glossary things too, but college textbooks, not as much. All right. So women's lives are pretty complicated in some ways because they're supposed to be great at everything, even though the main function of their lives is supposed to be wife and mother. Now, there'll be a little bit of a backlash to this in the women's rights movement in the 1960s. You don't see that so much in the 1950s. Okay, so one of the things also you should probably point out is how are the experiences different for women of color versus white women? You should imagine that they are different and that suburbs are very much segregated during this time period. They still are, we'll talk about that later, but they're segregated more by socioeconomics than race in the modern era. Okay, talk about that later. Foreign policy, Cold War doctrine. Okay, on this one, make sure you talk very specifically about the Eisenhower administration. So, Eisenhower is going to make sure, let's see, that we have control of the governments in Iran, Guatemala, and maybe not Vietnam. He's going to really reject the opportunity to get directly involved in the Vietnam conflict, but try to control things in a different way, maybe through funding or what you see in Guatemala and Iran is that we just directly overthrow their governments. We kind of sort of try to do that in Vietnam. Our goal really is to spend money to stay out of wars, direct conflicts, because honestly, Eisenhower knows how those things are. And even if we can win, which we probably can, although, Vietnam, we'll talk about that later, those things are expensive and people die in them. So if we can avoid them, there are probably better ways to deal with the conflict. So this section, you're going to talk about overthrowing some dictatorships or creating some dictatorships. You may be shocked by that. We have controlled a dictatorship in Cuba during that time period as well. And then when Castro overthrows it, he's a communist. Well, he is actually a communist, but he sides with the communists instead of us because we did kind of back the other dictatorship. And then we're going to really, really oppose that. But sorry, your question's not about Cuba, is it? Um, excuse me. But look into how we place the Shah of Iran and how we use the CIA to overthrow Central and South American governments during this time period. Pretty standard practice during this era. Okay. The civil rights movement, that's probably the one you already know the most about. So when you're talking about this stuff, feel free, to go back to talk about World War II stuff if you like. Certainly, you have to talk about Brown versus Board of Education. If you don't, I'm going to think you have lost your flippin' history mind. Brown versus Board of Education. What are you thinking? Most important Supreme Court case, at least in the 50s, but top 10 on everybody's list in the history of Supreme Court cases. You have to talk about it. Overthrows Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896. If you don't talk about it, dang, what are you thinking? Okay. This is also your chance to talk about your two favorite civil rights heroes. You know who they are. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks. We love both of them. They're completely relevant to this question, so feel free. Feel free. Also, I put a link to a really good video in there. I think it's a really good video. It's called Time for Justice, but I know it takes like 30 minutes. But what else are you doing anyway? This is also a video you could watch with your family and nobody would get really mad except for the beatings. And, it's not good for your little brothers and sisters. So, but it does show the early part of the civil rights movement and the Voting Rights Act all the way, through to the end of the early part of the civil rights movement. So that it's gonna have some Martin Luther King Jr. in there. It's gonna have the letter from the Birmingham jail. It's gonna have Rosa Parks. It's got a little bit of Emmett Till. Ooh, that's sad and depressing. Emmett Till's a 54 kind of thing, 54, 55. It also has, that's a little dude that goes from Chicago to stay with relatives in Mississippi for the summer. And his mom tells him, like, hey, buddy, when you go to the South, don't talk to white people. It's just bad news. And like every kid ever, he thinks his mom's dumb and that she's behind the times because, he grew up in Chicago. It's fairly integrated. He's got a bunch of white friends. He goes to an integrated school. And his thought is, Mom doesn't know what she's talking about. I got all these white friends. Well, Mom's from Mississippi and she knows what she's talking about. So he goes down there. He's a little smart aleck kid, 14, and says, bye, baby, or does something. We're not really sure what he does, to a white storekeeper's wife. And he does not live through the evening. And they show a little bit of the trial where the folks who kill him are found not guilty. And their defense is, we messed him up so badly, you don't know that it was really him. So it is rough, rough stuff. This is that's a tough time. So Brown versus Board of Education is going to be the foundation, the legal foundation of the civil rights movement. And you could easily point out in there too that our friend Harry Truman did desegregate the military. So you've got military desegregation, you've got Brown versus Board of Education, you've got Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., but you've also got massive resistance from the South. You've got the rise of the Klan. You've got that crazy Dixiecrat kind of thing. And you're not going to really get federal support for civil rights on the law enforcement side until the 1960s. You've got it on the presidential side, very much with Truman, kind of, sort of with Eisenhower. Now, I know, he sends in the troops to Little Rock Central. Sorry, I forgot. To Little Rock Central. But his heart's not really in it. I say this because, not because I don't like Eisenhower, I kind of do, for a lot of reasons, but he's not that great about civil rights, my impression. He sends in troops because that crazy little punk governor, Orville Faubus of Arkansas, said, you are not desegregating my high schools, and sends in the Arkansas National Guard. Well, Eisenhower's going to say, sure, that's okay. Heck no. I mean, he was the commander of NATO. He was the head of the European theater. He designed the D-Day assault. He's a general in the military, plus now he's the president. Heck no, he's not going to be okay with that. So he sends in the troops to desegregate and then allows the troops to stay, well, one paratrooper per 9 of the Little Rock, each person got their own paratrooper. Oh, and if you want to read a book, Warriors Don't Cry. Warriors Don't Cry. That's a good book about. It's Melba Batillo Beals, I think was her last name, because she gets married later. But she's one of the Little Rock Nine. So they get their own paratroopers until Christmas, and then the paratroopers are taken away. And then Ernest Green graduates. There's a Disney video, which is, you can show to your little brothers and sisters, Disney history video. About the Ernest Green story. But what happens the year or two after that is that Orville Faubus says, you know what, we really don't want to desegregate, but I don't want to get in Eisenhower's face again. So what I'm going to do is just no public high school at all. They canceled school. It was like a racial pandemic. I don't know. But they just called off public school for a couple of years. And instead, what they did is they gave everybody a voucher. And they said, you kids just go find your own private schools. Well, guess what? It wasn't illegal for private schools to discriminate by race. So black kids couldn't find a place to go to school. So they just didn't have a high school for a couple of years. So, and Eisenhower just went, that's okay, you weren't in my face. So Eisenhower's not super strong on civil rights. Although I know, Little Rock Central, I know. I know. Okay. But the civil rights question, dang, you got all kinds of cool stuff to talk about for that one. All right. I know we're running out of time because it takes forever to upload these, and I know you aren't paying that much. You are paying attention. I know you are because the video is short. I appreciate it. Some of you are even saying, I pause it and replay it. I'm honored. I'm really honored. So thanks. Yeah. No, I'm glad these are helpful. All right, conservative movement. Oh my goodness. All right, this is a political question. I know it's tricky, but there's a really good part of the book that will help you with this. It's at 954 to 916. It talks very specifically about this. So, what you're starting to notice is that Republicans and Democrats are changing. The national Democrats are taking on civil rights as their issue, but the regional, local, state Democrats aren't touching that thing. So that's really a Harry Truman thing. And you notice that led to the rise of the Dixiecrats and kind of creates a new split in the Democrats. Now, Eisenhower said that he was liberal with people and conservative with economics. I think you would think of him as like a George Bush sort of Republican or just a mainstream, sometimes people call them country club Republicans, where they don't want to go all Bible thumping on you, like God wants us to do this. They just don't want to spend too much money, but they want to make sure the military is kind of taken care of, but they don't want to break the bank. So those are kind of your mainstream. Let's do the right thing. Let's have, let's behave properly in public kind of Republicans. And then you start to develop a group of folks called libertarians. Libertarian Republicans start to develop during this time period. And those guys, those are the Ron Paul, Rand Paul kind of dudes. And they're mostly like, stay out of my business. And usually, okay, I'm going to make just a rude statement, but I'm going to say it. A lot of times high school kids and college kids like them because they go like, yeah, they'll let us have pot. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, both Rand Paul and Ron Paul were doctors, so they know that marijuana is not good for you. And all you comedians who think marijuana is good for you, oh my gosh, it's not like you're putting oregano on your food. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, all right. Um, Libertarians just don't care as long as what you do doesn't harm other people. Now, we can find instances where not yours, but other people's personal drug use does cause harm to other people. It usually really disrupts the family and causes some economic harm. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. If I ever see you again, yeah, we're talking about it because I don't know. I'm hearing stories about what you kids are doing in your Zoom meetings. But anyway, all right. But libertarians really kind of take the view that the government is supposed to stay out of stuff. It leads to more of a states' rights idea where the states take care of the things like education and infrastructure. The federal government takes care of the military, they guard the borders, and interstate highways. Oh, probably one of the most important things that Eisenhower does is create interstate highways. But anyway, so the libertarian conservatives are kind of the hands-off states' rights kind of guys. This is why eventually the South becomes Republican. Not yet, not yet. It's the 1980s, so hold off on that. But the South isn't there yet because what's going to happen pretty soon is the federal government's going to start enforcing civil rights laws. And then the South will go like, hey, states have the right to enforce those things. And then you end up with a big mess. So if you're one of those people that's asking the question, hey, when do the Republicans become racist and when did the Democrats stop being racist? Neither Democrats nor Republicans will like that question. Okay, I got to wrap this up, don't I? So conservative movement, not cohesive either. So you've got fiscal conservatives, you've got military conservatives, the guys who really dislike the evil, godless communists. You don't really have the super religious conservatives. Those are coming too later, like late 70s, early 80s. But then you have the libertarian conservatives. Just look at the book. It'll help you a lot. Also, don't sneak off and hang out with John Green on this one because I know he's got a video that says New Conservatives. That's only about the 1980s. I looked at it because I thought, well, I'll just tell you that it would be helpful, but it's too late. So don't use that. You heard me. Don't use that. Okay. Your discussion board, the discussion board prompt is going to be fun, so you'll be fine. 1950s culture, and that one I'll highly expect that you talk about the music. You can talk about the poetry, the beat generation. I put a bunch of videos in there and a really did I no, I think I didn't end up putting the news article in there because I thought, oh, they'll just choke on it because it was probably 20 pages long and really scholarly, and it was way more difficult than the textbook. I'm not trying to be rude to you. I'm just saying you only have a limited amount of time. So if you want to know that, I'll send you a link to it later. I'm not trying to be rude at all, but you will notice that the music is different and people will start to call it maybe the devil's music. You will notice that rock and roll is really becoming more influenced by Southern and African American traditions. You'll notice that the music movement is going to become slightly more international, much more true in the 60s. And then you'll start to see protests of civil rights issues, wars, that kind of stuff. It's coming. It's not so much during this time period. During this time period, people are going to think it's a little disrespectful and a little wild. And it leads to bad dancing, which, if you're Baptist, you know what that leads to. It's why Baptists don't dance until recently. So you got to be careful with the dancing thing. The pages for that are 965 to 969, and it's really specific. And I really think the questions this week, you'll like them. I think they'll be pretty easy for you. Now, if you are having any difficulties at all related to the schoolwork, please email me and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you're having any other difficulties, oh no, man, I think, studying history makes everything better, everything better. But I hope that you're doing well, to be, quite honest with you. I know this is challenging for you. It's challenging for me too, but I know I'm not a kid. I've been through stuff, so I'm okay, right? I know it's hard on you, but I'll just, give you that exhortation to hang in there, do your best. If you're not doing well, if you're having trouble with the work, and if you having trouble with the work is related to you having trouble with other stuff, let me know as much as you're comfortable letting me know. If you need more time or something like that. Now, not all the time, and we have to end the class at a certain point, and you can't. Be reasonable about this stuff. But I don't want you to stress out. And there's a survey, which maybe you did, that is really kind of designed to see if workload's appropriate, if you think one of those Zoom meetings would be helpful. I'm scared about the Zoom meeting because you guys will be posting weird comments or, other stuff, which I don't even want to think about. So, but I know there's settings. Okay. Well, I'm going to sign off here. Did you count all the books? There's so many books back there. And the number of castles from graduation. And did I tell you Pleasantville was the movie that you could watch about the 1950s culture if you have free time and it's mostly appropriate for your brothers and sisters? No, it's not really. Yeah. Anytime they do something they're not supposed to do, the whole movie's in black and white, and the old Spider-Man guy is in the movie and he gets absorbed into a TV show, and it's pretty weird. But it does a nice job of showing what 50s culture is like. It's a black and white show, but then when they do something that's unusual or stands out, and what happens is they get color. So it really is kind of an interesting thing. Oh my gosh, I've gone over 25 minutes. I'm just about to stop. Okay, so stay well, stay socially distant. Go mow the old lady next door's lawn if she'll let you. Wave at her. Go visit your relatives in the nursing home through the window, of course, wave to them. Hope you had a good holiday with your family over the weekend, and just take care of yourselves. All right, I will see you soon. Bye.